The topic of today is going to be clay soils. Clay can have a love-hate relationship with gardeners, so we're going to take a look at just what exactly is clay soil, what you can do to make clay soil a little bit more enjoyable to work with, and then we're going to take a look at a large list of annuals, perennials, and shrubs that would do well in clay soil. So for those of you who have been asking what plants can be grown in clay soil, today is the day we're going to get that question answered for you. Hi, I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings, and as I mentioned, clay soil can be both a blessing and a curse. Like anything in life, it's just how you deal with it that makes the total difference. So clay soil really is excellent because it binds together nutrients and minerals, the things that plants need to live and to thrive. And it's also good at holding moisture as it just slowly seeps down through the soil and gets to the roots of those plants. The issue comes, though, is when that clay holds too much moisture. Some plants just cannot stand wet roots. And especially in the winter, I think that's where a lot of times we find issues with our plants, where their roots have been wet or moist for an extended amount of time. And that's when we find that our plants don't survive through the winter. In fact, winter wetness, due to being sitting in saturated areas of moisture, that actually does more of the winter killing than what cold temperatures do in the garden. So that's something I think that many of you might find interesting, is it's not necessarily the cold, but it's just those roots getting that root rot. So let's take a look at what clay soil is. What do you look for in your garden to know if you have clay soil? So clay soil in many areas of the country has a reddish color to it. In other areas of the country, like we do here in Michigan, our clay tends to be more of a grayish color. It's what I think of when you have art in school back in the day, at least for me back in the day, when you'd be molding those art pieces together. That was always that light gray color, and that's what we find here in the ground in West Michigan. Clay absorbs water slowly and takes time to dry out. It clumps together, so if you're working in the garden with your tools and stuff, a lot of times clay will stick to those tools. It can also crust and kind of crack when it gets dry. All in all, clay is just, it tends to be kind of a hard soil to work with, to dig into and to plant into. So what are some of the good things about clay? I mean, obviously not everything can be bad about it. So some of the good parts about clay is usually clay is more fertile. It holds more nutrients and it can hold water. The roots can anchor better into clay soil. Unlike sand, if you're planting in sand, those plants can usually easily just be kind of lifted out because there's not a lot of substance for those roots to anchor into. In sand or loose soils, plants sometimes can winter heave, which basically means, if you have them planted in the ground, the plant will kind of lift up and out of the ground. Where with clay, because those roots kind of stick in the ground, you don't see as much of that winter heaving with the clay soil as you do with some of the looser soils. Another benefit with clay is typically you have to water less and you have to fertilize less. And that's because, again, it holds that moisture and it's also really nutrient rich. And it's a better foundation for winter hardiness as well. Provides more protection to those roots as long as it's well drained. So some of the bad parts about clay, though, it's hard to work with. It's heavy. It clumps. It's not nice and rich like nice topsoil is. It can get sloppy and slippery when it's wet. And it can hold too much water. So that water is a blessing and a curse, especially when it's holding too much water, because what that does is it creates root rot for the plants. And that's where you see a lot of your plants may die off. It's because the roots are just too wet. So fertilizing with clay soil, as we mentioned, clay soil is very nutrient rich typically. So if you are using fertilizer with clay, it's generally best to kind of start off sparingly with the fertilizer, because you don't want to over fertilize with what nature's already giving your plants, in addition to the supplemental fertilizer that you'll be adding on top. Typically with clay too, people tend to overwater. And because clay holds that water, you want to probably water a little bit more sparingly, especially if you know that clay does tend to be a little wet. Now, obviously, on the other side of the spectrum, clay can also get rock hard and super dry. So that's a whole different monster to have to contend with. But typically, it's going to be just too much moisture in the clay soil that people are going to be dealing with. How can you improve your clay soil if you are working with clay in your garden? Well, what we would recommend is adding in some organic matter, some compost. You could even use some fine wood bark or some peat moss. Mix that in really well with your clay, and it just helps kind of break it up and let the water drain better. And it makes that soil just not as dense. So when we're talking to people about planting in their clay, what we recommend doing is digging the hole anywhere from 2 to 3 times larger than the pot of the plant that they're going to be putting into the hole. And then we recommend that they are putting in compost or peat or that fine wood bark around their plant. That way, when that plant starts to put on growth, the roots have a easier time to kind of start rooting out before they have to really start to fight their way through potentially that hard clay or that wet clay. So when they're getting established, they have a quicker, easier place to do their growing before they're fighting their way continually on the way out. So what are some plants that can grow in clay? Now, I have a big list of plants we're going to talk about today. We're going to have the perennials, the annuals, and the shrubs. But one thing I do need to say is with clay soil and you're planting your plants, it is important that you have good drainage. So even though we're going to show you the plants that go good in clay, most of these plants are going to still require good drainage, and good drainage can be done by amending the clay around the plant that you are going to be planting. So let's start off with the perennials. Monarda or bee balm are typically a good selection for clay. They can tolerate that heavy clay well. They do prefer to have rich soil with good drainage. So this is where it comes into play. They can grow, they can do well in clay, but you do need to make for sure that they're going to have the drainage available for them. Also, black-eyed Susans, that's another plant that will handle the clay. So if you think about it, black-eyed Susans are kind of a native perennial. They grow out in the prairie, they grow out in the wild, and really they can tolerate a lot of different growing conditions, especially dry areas. So if that clay tends to start to dry out a little bit, black-eyed Susans can be right at home in that situation. The next plant is liatris, which are those beautiful purple spiked flowers. And liatris, they can grow in various soil types, including clay. Fertile soil, if the soil is just too fertile for the liatris, that's where you find that they may flop. So they kind of do prefer to have a little bit more of the soil that's not ideal to grow best. Coneflowers, I think those are kind of a very well-known favorite among gardeners. And coneflowers are wonderful because there are so many different options of colors of coneflowers that if you were looking to create a beautiful array of color in your garden, there's just about every color coneflower available. And two, if you're looking to kind of stagger the different heights in the garden, coneflowers come in a lot of different heights. So you can have the shorter varieties or you can have the taller varieties. So when you're putting your garden designs together, you know, there's a coneflower that can go front border, middle, or back to fit any size height you're looking to create in that garden. Another plant that I think is just very versatile in many different garden planting situations are cranesbill, also known as perennial geraniums. So I know when I tell people, oh, let's, go look at the geraniums, the perennials, and they're like, no, Heidi, geraniums are not perennials. They think of the annual geraniums. But no, there are perennial geraniums, and they look nothing like the annual geraniums. So totally different plant family. But geraniums do really well in clay soil. A lot of times they'll be used as a border. They usually have a nice mounding habit. They do come in various heights. So check out the different varieties as far as how tall of a plant you want. Typically, they're going to have a nice mounding habit. A lot of times people will plant them around their rose bushes or use them kind of as like a underplanting type plant. But cranesbill, they're a good plant you can tuck into any place in the garden. and the flowers are shades usually of purples, pinks, and sometimes a little bit of white. So really vibrant, pretty colors the cranesbill come in. The next plant, and these are such an easy to grow plant variety, and I probably maybe shouldn't have even listed it, because I think if you have clay soil, you're pretty aware that daylilies are a good selection to plant in your clay gardens. Daylilies are virtually carefree. They're one of the easiest plants to grow, very little maintenance. They're adaptable to just about any type of soil condition. Amend your clay with some organic matter, keep it nice, evenly moist, and your daylilies are going to be happy for years to come. And again, with daylilies, it's nice because they come in a wide variety of colors, also a wide variety of heights. And there's a lot of daylilies that are reblooming, so they will add color to your garden like all summer long. Usually I find with the reblooming varieties, they typically maybe have a little bit smaller flower, but you do find that they come in a lot of different flower colors. So it's not just like the yellows that everybody perhaps is thinking of. They come in reds and pinks and a lot of variety in those rebloomers. So a great plant, a lot of people will use them as foundation plantings, planting them around the base of their house, just because they're easy to grow and really adaptable to just about anywhere in your garden. Now, speaking of another plant that is easy to grow, very adaptable, and I think probably majority of gardeners, and probably I shouldn't say that, but a lot of gardeners have hostas in their garden. So hostas are a great shade option if you've got clay in your shade gardens. They're a great shade option. Amend the clay soil with organic matter, and just make sure that they do have good drainage, because this is a plant where if those roots do stay wet, they could have some root rot go on. But they can handle the clay. Just make sure you've got good drainage around your plant. And hostas are nice because they've got that beautiful foliage that colors up the garden all summer long. And also, too, a lot of them have really pretty flowers, too, that the hummingbirds like. So, look at the hostas if you've got clay in your shady areas. Now, another plant, and this one I think is great. It's another native variety. It's milkweed, and we're looking here specifically at the swamp milkweed. The one we carry is Asclepias cinderella, which has a really pretty pink flower on it. A lot of times, if you are growing native plants, those are going to be the plants that are adaptable in many areas of the garden, because obviously are out in nature isn't giving them, nature is not pampering these native plants. These native plants have to handle and tolerate what nature's giving them. So it may be poor soil, it may be rich soil, it may be times of drought or times with a lot of water. So a lot of times you'll find your native varieties do good in your clay soil. So swamp milkweed is the type of milkweed that can handle the more moist or wet conditions. So if that clay does tend to stay a little bit damp for periods of time, swamp milkweed is going to be the one that you would want to use. Now, the beauty of milkweed, and I've talked about this in a lot of our videos, is if you are looking to attract the monarch butterflies to your garden, it's important to have milkweed or Asclepias in the garden. So why not? If you've got clay, put a little milkweed in there and watch for those monarch butterflies. Another perennial would be Russian sage, which is a perennial that can handle drought type conditions, dry soil, poor soil. It can tolerate clay as well, as long as there is adequate drainage. So I know you're seeing there's a theme here. I keep saying, adequate drainage, which when you have the clay soil, you have to know how to work with it. You have to know how to make your plants thrive and survive. And if you can do that first step up front and, give it that adequate drainage by amending the soil and just loosening up that tight compactness of clay, that will help you be successful with these plants that can be grown in the clay soil area. Another one is sedum, and sedum is a very carefree plant, drought tolerant, handles poor soils, handles dry soils, handles clay soils. Again, we're going to reiterate, as long as you've got good drainage, it's going to do well in your clay gardens. We're going to take a look now at some shrubs for your garden, and there's a large list of shrubs. I've picked maybe 5 or 6 of my favorites personally to talk about. And we're going to start off with Weigela. So Weigela comes in various heights. It can be as short as 18 inches or as tall as, let's say, 6 foot tall. They also have a lot of foliage interest. They've got green leaves. They've got the dark near black leaves. They've got the variegated leaves. So not only are you getting beautiful flowers from the Weigela, you're also getting great foliage as well. And the flower colors, they come in pinks, whites, and reds. Also, there's a lot of new varieties out there now that are rebloomers. So not only will they bloom in the spring, but they will continue to bloom 2 or 3 times throughout the summer. So that's really nice when you can have these shrubs that are doing more than just that one and done. They're just continuing to give you color throughout the season. So I tend to like to find those shrubs that rebloom and kind of give me multi-seasons of interest. Now, smooth hydrangeas too are another great native shrub that do well in soil conditions. As we mentioned, native varieties are very versatile, and those natives are the ones that I would probably look for first if I was planting in clay. So smooth hydrangeas, they can handle heavy, moisture-rich clay. So what are some smooth hydrangeas? So Annabelle is probably the most common or most known variety, but let me tell you, there's a lot of great smooth hydrangeas on the market right now. And this is probably a good point. I should have mentioned it earlier. I'm going to be putting links to all of these varieties we're talking about today down in the description below on YouTube. So if you want more information on any of these plants, you can head to our website, gardencrossings.com, where we'll get you the information. But also, too, we can ship any and all of these plants directly to your door. So don't hesitate to go to the website and check it out for more information. The nice thing too with smooth hydrangeas is they bloom off of new growth. So they're very reliable bloomers. You don't have to worry about, will my hydrangea bloom? These smooth hydrangeas are reliable and bloom year after year and are very easy to care for. The next plant on the list is Rose of Sharon, or more like the shrub type hibiscus. So Rose of Sharon are adaptable in most soil conditions, including clay. And the thing I like about Rose of Sharon is they bloom for a very long time throughout the season. Also, too, I find hummingbirds on my Rose of Sharon frequently, and I have mine planted in a part sun or part shade, however you want to say it, area in my garden. And even they prefer full sun, but even not being in full sun, they continue to bloom throughout the summer and really bring a lot of beautiful flower color into my garden. Another plant or another shrub would be the flowering quince. So quince are a spring blooming shrub. They can be grown in clay. The one thing you might find though when planting quince in clay is they may not get as big as if you had them in better drained soil. But sometimes we don't want our quince to get as big as what they can get. So maybe being in this clay, keeping them sized down a little bit might actually be more of a blessing than not. And the nice thing with the quince we carry right now, they're thornless. So a lot of the old varieties of quince have thorns. You don't want to deal with them because who wants to deal with a shrub that has thorns unless if you're planting it for purposes of protection so people don't climb in your windows or something like that. But these new varieties of quince are thornless. So I think they're a lot more enjoyable to work with in the garden setting. Another shrub that has fantastic foliage interest and color and is a good selection for clay are elderberries. So they like to be grown in moist, fertile conditions, including clay. And there are so many cool elderberries out there right now. There's ones that have chartreuse green foliage. There's ones with near black foliage. They're nice and lacy and airy. And I just mentioned one of the names, black lace, lemony lace. Those are 2 of the varieties we carry, along with laced up. So some really fun, cool texture and color to add to your landscapes or your garden. With elderberries, and they also get some white flowers on them too, so that's kind of nice as well. But plants that shrubs that do really good in clay conditions. And the next list we're going to look at is annuals. So now, you've been told some perennials, we talked about some shrubs. Now we're going to look at some annuals that can be grown in clay soil. Now, I'm going to say they can be grown in clay soil, but this is another one too. Make sure your clay soil has that good drainage. So cannas are a great annual for clay soil. They're an excellent thriller to put in containers, which you wouldn't have clay in containers, but also to put into the landscape. So usually the cannas, the ones we grow, will get about 3, sometimes 4 foot tall. They come in reds, oranges, yellows. Some have green leaves. Some have more that purpley or burgundy type leaf. Excellent long blooming annuals, which annuals are long blooming. They bloom all summer long. But that gives you some excellent height to add into your garden beds for just that tropical feel throughout the summer. The next plant on the list is Gara, and Gara is such a fun, whimsy annual. Now, for some of you, Gara may be a perennial, depending on where you live. For us here in West Michigan, Gara can be hit and miss. It's kind of like a tender perennial in Michigan, so we use it as an annual. But Gara has such a fun, airy, wispy look about the flowers, and even the foliage on it is thin and kind of strappy. But I love to use Gara, just tucking them into little spots in the garden where you're just looking for some soft little wisps kind of here and there. It gets about 24 to 30 or so inches tall, depending on, where you're at and how long your growing season is. But it's just a nice, airy, wispy addition to poke in your garden bed. Flower colors typically are white or pink, and just beautiful. Another plant that is good for clay soil is lantana. Lantana is a very drought-tolerant, heat-loving annual. And some places, like especially down south, I've seen them grow into full-on shrubs. Now, in Michigan, obviously, lantana dies back in the winter, but I've been in Florida before, and I've seen people in their landscape having these big, beautiful lantana shrubs, per se, with just so many beautiful flowers on them. And lantana is an excellent annual for bringing those hummingbirds into the garden. Another plant that does good in the clay soil are salvia, the annual salvia, and they're an excellent thriller as well in the garden. We have a lot of salvia in our flower beds at Garden Crossings, and we do have some clay in our soil. For the most part, we have nice rich soil, that's nice topsoil, but definitely there are spots of clay, and the salvia does really well in the beds that have that clay. They bloom profusely all summer long and are another great plant for the butterflies and the hummingbirds. And the last plant on the list are verbena. So verbena or superbena, they are a nice, again, ground cover in the landscape. They don't get very tall. They spread usually 18, 20 or so inches, sometimes more. And they flower all summer long. They like to be planted in full sun. They can handle the heat, and they come in a wide variety of colors, as do the salvia. They have a lot of colors as well. So you can create a beautiful oasis in your clay soil garden by using some of these plants that we talked about today, and just amending that soil, helping the plants have as much nice, rich soil around them in the holes that you're digging, and just letting them thrive in that beautiful, nice soil before they have to start working their way through that wet or hard clay soil. If you have any questions or comments on any of the plants that we talked about today, please feel free to leave them below. And if you have any favorites that you like to use in your clay soil garden, I'd love to hear from you, because I think we can always learn from each other. This was just a small list, but I know there's a lot more plants out there, and I know our viewers like to read the comments as well to see what are other people doing and having success with. If you're new to our channel, we welcome you to subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings.